All right. Hello, everyone. It's just past 1 p.m. So maybe we should go ahead and get started. I'm sure a few more people will be joining us, but welcome. This is the first training in a series that was made possible thanks to an MS4 municipal assistance grant from Massachusetts DEP and in partnership with the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission, Neponset River Watershed Association, and the Center for Watershed Protection. So welcome. I hope you join us for the other 3 trainings in the series. But to start us off, we're going to talk about what developers need to know, an overview of Massachusetts stormwater regulations. So a little bit about this project. Our intent is to deliver live and on-demand online trainings to the Massachusetts development community with the goal to increase the understanding of how to prevent stormwater pollution and design projects that comply with stormwater standards. So the on-demand online trainings will be available later this summer, and they'll be comprised of a lot of the content that's going to be presented during these live trainings and incorporating feedback from participants. So we would really be grateful to you if you'd participate in our brief feedback survey that's going to pop up on your screen at the end of this meeting. And to look at today's agenda, we're going to start with a quick icebreaker to give us a little lighthearted fun to start our afternoons. Then we're going to go over the overview of Massachusetts Stormwater regulations while Phil Paradis from Beta Group join us to discuss those. Next, we're going to have Deb Caraco from the Center for Watershed Protection present on the benefits of green infrastructure and low impact development, followed by Scott Turner from Environmental Partners to talk about considerations of risk during design, and he'll share a couple of case studies. And we'll also hear a case study from Dayton Marchese from Opti about smart reuse of stormwater. And then we're going to close off the training today with considerations when hiring engineering consultants. These segments will be recorded, so please make sure you are muted throughout the training, but there will be periodic breaks for a Q&A and also an interactive activity. So during those times, please feel free to raise your hand, unmute yourself, ask questions, or post your questions in the chat box. So to start with an icebreaker, I have a couple poll questions for you. I'm going to launch the first poll, and this is just to get an idea of who we have participating in the training today. So the first poll question that should pop up on your screen is, what type of organization are you affiliated with? We'll give folks a minute to respond. We're about 70% there. Right, so taking a look at these results, it looks like we have about 20% are engineers or site development consultants. It looks like a majority of folks participating today are from a government agency, either federal, state, or local. We have a couple nonprofits and a property manager. The next question is, how many people are participating from your site or from your location? So I know a lot of you are excited to join us and have shared this training with colleagues. So let's see how many of you are sitting in a room with maybe small or larger groups. All right, so about 60% are participating alone, but it looks like we've got some small groups of 2 to 5 or 6 to 10 participating from your locations. So welcome. If your name isn't on the participant list, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box. All right, now we're going to play a little game, again, to break the ice, called This or That. So very simple, self-explanatory. I'm going to ask you a question. Are you a cat person or a dog person? And I want you to go ahead and put in the chat box. So we've got a few dog people, awesome. All right, and coming up cat people. Oh, and we have a specifically lab preference. Awesome, okay. So the next question is, cold weather or hot weather? What would you prefer? And I guess based on these pictures, it looks like, are you a cold weather vacationer or a hot weather vacationer? All right, a good mixture, hot or cold weather, both or neither. Okay. Next question is, do you prefer to travel by train or travel by plane? Got a plane person, a train person. I think COVID has definitely changed our preference in transportation. Depends on the distance. And I like that teleportation. Next time I'll add an option for that. All right. Next question is, fishing or kayaking? Do you prefer to or I don't want to say lazy because some big fish might work your biceps, but are you a chill by the lake and fish, or do you like the adventurous kayaking? Both. We got some kayaking, we have a paddle boarder. Very nice. Okay. Next question is, sweets or savory? Do you have a preference for, this shows cupcakes, but there are plenty of delicious sweets, cake, cookies, muffins, or are you a savory person? What can you not live without, your sweets or your savory? All right, looks like we've got a good balance, savory, sweets. I like the olives. Do I have to decide? Nope, you don't have to decide. Luckily, we can have our sweets and our savory too. All right, next one is pasta or ramen? Are you a Italian fan? Do you like your pasta, or do you like your noodles in a nice soup? I've got a lot of pasta, impossible choice. I'm preferential to ramen. I think that braised egg is probably one of my favorite things. Okay. All right, next we have, do you prefer city living or country living? And I tried to find some pictures from Massachusetts. We've got a nice picture of Boston and then a picture of the Berkshires. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, you Massachusetts folks. But okay, we've got country, rural, city, both. Country for sure. Okay, good mix here. And then my last question is, because we're in the virtual world now, and I've seen some people have really strong preferences, are you a Zoom person or a Teams person? All right, some pretty quick responses with Zoom. Either yes. Okay. Oh, lots of Zoomers. Okay. I think I might be preferential to Teams because of the really awesome backgrounds. I like participating in meetings from a spaceship. All right. Nice Zoom and either. All right. Well, thank you so much for participating in this game. It gives me a little bit of idea, and the other speakers a little bit of idea of who you are and some of your preferences. But now we're going to get into the meat of the training. I'm going to introduce our next speaker. So Phil Paradis has 35 years of professional experience in the civil engineering field. He is a professional engineer in Massachusetts, a lead accredited professional, and certified professional in stormwater quality. Bill has a broad expertise in stormwater management systems, including evaluation, modeling, design, analysis, and inspection for a wide variety of land development projects, such as subdivisions, gas stations, and shopping malls, as well as municipal infrastructure projects related to roads, parks, bridges, and culverts. He has completed stream and river hydrologic and hydraulic analyses to facilitate design of culverts, revetments, and stream restoration. He is skilled in implementing and retrofitting best management practices and low impact development, or LID, you might hear that today, techniques to meet the current stormwater standards and EPA requirements and resolve flooding issues. Bill also heads a group that provides MS4 permit services to a dozen municipalities and provides stormwater management peer review services for numerous municipal boards, commissions throughout Massachusetts. So welcome, Bill. He's going to be talking about the Massachusetts stormwater regulations, and that's going to be followed by a brief Q&A with Bill. So I will allow you to share your screen now, Phil, and you're ready to go whenever.
Can you see the screen now? All right, what am I doing?
Did
I can see the screen.
Okay. Well, let me, you can see the screen right now, right?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
I can see the screen in Boston, but someone sitting right across from me can't see the screen. I don't know what that's about.
Really? Okay. Anyway, so it's you see the introductory frame of my presentation, correct? With beta on the beta logo on it.
Yes.
Okay.
I can see that.
Sorry about that. All right, thank you, Leah, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm gonna give you a little brief presentation on the regulations and where they are, where they were, and what they're gonna be, I guess. So brief outline here is we're just gonna talk about the increasing regulatory requirements related to stormwater management. And as you'll see that it's ever increasing and going forward. So we're going to talk about the past, the present, and potentially the future requirements, near future requirements, as well as looking where you should look for potential permits related to stormwater and where to look. And then we'll have some questions. So first of all, 1996, there were basically no regulations other than you're not allowed to flood out your neighbor. So the peak rate of runoff was the only thing we were concerned about back then. And then in 1996, Mass DEP came out with their stormwater management standards, which were pretty revolutionary at the time, required first flush treatments and the whole 9 yards, no whole 9 standards there. But they were pretty much regulated through the Wetlands Protection Act and the Notice of Intent process, and therefore were not town or citywide or outside of wetland jurisdiction. They were typically not included in projects. In 2003, EPA came out with their first MS4 permit. It's the Massachusetts Separate Storm Sewer System permit that required municipalities to adopt regulations to prohibit illicit discharges and erosion control runoff to waters it required all developments to have a stormwater management plan and an extensive operation and maintenance plan. These were required for developments that disturbed greater than an acre of land. In 2008, the Wetlands Protection Act incorporated now more stringent Mass DEP stormwater standards in the act, and recently, whereas is in 2016, EPA came out with this new MS4 permit, which became effective in 2018. It required a substantially higher treatment of runoff, and especially impacts in a major way redevelopment projects to treat runoff for not only for TSS, but for phosphorus removal, and especially required implementation in watersheds of impaired waterways and waterways with TMDLs. Now, each one of the municipalities, though, took this opportunity to evaluate stormwater as it associates in their town, and many have developed thresholds that are lower than the 1 acre minimum that require either a full permit or potentially an administrative review, and just to make sure that stormwater practices were incorporated, that gave the opportunity for towns to again treat runoff before it gets to their systems, and also require operation and maintenance plans for various for the projects. Recently, there's been a few different guidelines that have come out. Mass DOT has come out with their new standards to meet their requirements, and it has a lot of great information related to roadway and stormwater infrastructure. EPA has recently come out with the New England stormwater retrofit manual. There's been a lot of negotiating and trying to figure out how to best apply retrofits to maybe challenging situations related to groundwater or soils or lack of space and such. So there's a lot of great ideas in that guidance to help you find tools for your particular site. And if you are required to file with MEPA or you have state grant funding, then you'll want to look at the Massachusetts Climate Resilience Design Standards tool to implement their recommendations as you go through the design process. So in the future, we're looking at a new EPA storm. It's a Mass DEP is coming out with their stormwater standards. It should be imminent. We've been waiting for quite a while, but it should bring it in line with the requirements for EPA. We're expecting either greater detail or more implementation of low impact development techniques and best management practices. We're expecting adjustments for climate change, utilizing the newer rainfall data and potentially other changes. EPA is coming out, will need to come out with a new MS4 permit, and we're guessing that's going to be more stringent related to impaired waterways and treatment of runoff to them, coming up with a plan similar to the phosphorus control plan for many of the impaired waterways. So in EPA is in discussion with us and let us know that they're going to implement their residual designation authority and require permits for existing commercial and industrial properties that have greater than an acre of impervious, requiring retrofits likely. So now, when you're looking for permits related to stormwater management, you want to really review the local bylaws, because that's where the majority of your there's more stringent requirements will be, if there are. And obviously you want to check with the Mass DEP stormwater regs and such, but anyway, the first thing you want to do really is to look for the entity in town that acts as the stormwater authority. Many towns operate in different ways. Many have different regulatory requirements related to stormwater. But the first thing you want to do is to find their regulations, find the thresholds related to disturbance requirements, and then find the entity that is running the stormwater program, and potentially meet with them first before really putting a lot of effort into your project. And obviously, if it's MIPA, then you're going to go through the MIPA threshold, evaluations and such. So hopefully that was, I know it was a brief outline, and I just wanted to give you that background as we potentially look at answering questions. Any questions?
Thank you, Phil. It was great. So now is the time, if you would like, you can raise your hand and ask a question, or feel free to put your questions in the chat box. All right, Mark?
Yeah, I was gonna ask a question in regard to the requirement over 1 acre. Is that regardless of being adjacent to a wetland? Or does that have to be an impervious site, or is it just any site in general that's over 1 acre?
So if you're talking about a development project, if you're going to disturb greater than 1 acre of soil, you're going to expose an acre or more of soil on your site, then it doesn't matter where you are, whether in relation to wetlands or other issues. That's typically the guidance. Now, I would make sure, check locally, because many of the towns I work with, it could be a half an acre, it could be 10,000 square feet. Some towns have administrative review from 5,000 to a half an acre. So you want to make sure you understand who's going to review it and what at what point.
Did that answer your question, Mark?
Yeah, it's hard to say when they need to switch, because we've had sites, I used to give out permits and they didn't have a SWIP, and it would cause problems, a lot of erosion problems. So it's hard to determine exactly when they need a plan. Seems a lot of gray areas in there, but I guess like you said, it doesn't matter. So it's over an acre.
So that's a different requirement. That's an EPA requirement related to disturbance. It may not be required for a local permit. You will have to provide a stormwater pollution prevention plan for any project that disturbs greater than an acre. But many local requirements have similar operation and maintenance plans, erosion control plan requirements, stormwater management plan requirements. So you really want to check with them as well.
Okay, we have one other question in the chat box from Megan, which is cutting trees but not removing stumps considered disturbing soil?
That would be left to the interpretation of the particular board, but in my experience is that's typically not, if you're not actually moving the soil or disrupting the soil, you will be changing the hydrology, but not disturbing the soil.
Right,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to introduce our next speaker now. If anyone has other questions for Phil, at the end of the training, he's going to be coming back and all the speakers will be available for Q&A. So feel free to track any additional questions in the chat box and we'll bring those back up at the end of the training. So our next speaker is Deb Caraco from the Center for Watershed Protection. She's been an employee with the center since 1996 and currently works for the center remotely from Ithaca, New York, in the beautiful Finger Lakes region. Her areas of focus include IDDE, pollutant modeling, stormwater design, and data analysis. She'll be talking to you today about the benefits of green infrastructure and low impact development. And that's going to be followed by a brief activity. So take it away, Deb. Deb, are you able to share your screen?
Okay, sorry, can people see this slide?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you. All right, so I'm going to do kind of a almost like a back to basics kind of presentation. I know I see there's some engineers here that'll it'll seem like old hat to them, but I really just want to kind of go almost a little bit behind the regulations of what are the kind of the reasons we're doing them, but also some of the benefits of green infrastructure and low impact development. So, no trouble advancing. Oh my gosh. Okay, here we go. All right, so just an overview. I'm going to talk a little bit about the impacts of land cover change, the benefits in green infrastructure, and I'm just going to kind of run through a few of the practice options that are kind of under that green infrastructure / LID umbrella. Okay, so I think when Phil was talking about the history of regulations and what was what they were dealing with, a lot of this is we're over our history trying to mitigate the impacts of the effects of development on hydrology. So the underlying issue is that by developing land, we're disrupting what the natural water balance is. And as a consequence of that, we're seeing increased peak discharges. Our old regulations really were only dealing with that issue, with flooding and trying to figure out how to get water either away or prevent major floods. We get an increased volume of stormwater runoff. We get more frequent flooding and increased bankful flows. So those are the flows that form stream channels. And then as a consequence of that, we've got more runoff going off the surface. We're having lower dry weather flows. As our regulations have changed, we've really started to focus more on these issues of the volume of stormwater runoff and this looking at our dry weather flows, trying to get more recharge. Okay, so just kind of, again, I think lots of people here may have seen something like this before. As we, a kind of an indicator of how much development there is, or an indicator of development, is the amount of impervious cover. It's kind of a nice, simple way to look at it. And as we start, increasing our amount of impervious cover, we see the hydrologic cycle change. And so a big piece of this is we have less transpiration, and we have less infiltration, but we get more surface run. Oops. Okay, so for the water quality impacts, this is something we've been regulating for quite a while, kind of late 90s. Most places in Massachusetts started to regulate water quality impacts. It's kind of related to how we've changed our hydrologic cycle, but also about pollutants in the environment that are introduced by land development. And so again, as we're thinking about how green infrastructure practices work, or any stormwater practices work, if we do nothing, we'd see stormwater pick up pollutants over impervious surfaces, or there are other areas of the land, quickly get to the waterway, and that's where we get impairments from. Okay, so as a shorthand, I'm not going to get too caught up about the definitions of whether it's green infrastructure or low impact development or other definitions. Kind of within this group, I'm kind of talking about all these practices that are using natural systems or natural methods to try to reproduce our original hydrograph, our pre-developed hydrograph. So green infrastructure, elements or approaches, they help with addressing water quantity by essentially acting like a sponge on the land cover. They're trying to reproduce what pervious surfaces do in a way. They're by trying to hold on to water and store it either temporarily or sometimes permanently by achieving infiltration. Another benefit of the projects of green infrastructure practices is their water quality benefits. By using practices that to some extent try to excuse me, incorporate vegetation, we get all those effects of vegetation in the landscape to be able to reduce pollutants. At the same time, they act in the same way as any stormwater practice by allowing pollutants to settle. Some other benefits. So again, a lot of these, especially over time, when we think about stormwater, we have to be thinking about everything else that's around it. We have to be thinking about climate change effects, how to reduce climate change. We have to be thinking about our air quality, and these practices as a group can be really great in that they help achieve additional benefits that help the community and that help achieve other environmental benefits. Just a few of these. They're generally kind of really attractive practices. They can provide wildlife habitat. They can be helpful with meeting air quality requirements or helping with those. Reducing the heat island effect is a huge one. A lot of these practices are incorporating trees or incorporating vegetation in urban settings. That's a tremendous benefit. Depending on how they're done, they can improve traffic safety. I guess the other side of them needing maintenance is that they're good jobs to maintain and manage them. And finally, for people who are developing sites that are trying to achieve LEED certification, these practices can play a piece in that. Okay, so I'm just going to go really quickly through a few of the kind of types of approaches that are under that umbrella of green infrastructure, and talk a little bit about the concerns or things we need to think about when we're using those approaches. A couple of our other presentations are going to go into a lot of detail of using practices on specific sites. So the first thing that you should do if you're developing a new site is be looking at the overall site design. So the first thing that we want to do is look at how do I reduce the amount of impervious cover? How do I preserve forested areas? How do I preserve key habitats? This is the most cost-effective and easiest way, could be the easiest way, I should say, to achieve all these goals. Some of the benefits, it's great at reducing stormwater. I mean, the best way to reproduce your natural hydrograph is to try to disturb as little as you can and try to be the most like a natural landscape. By concentrating where development occurs on a site, by using open channel kind of practices, it's really a great way to achieve some resilience for flooding, allow a greater kind of passageway for flood flows. Depending on, some of these designs can increase property values, especially, having trees and habitat value. Some of the kind of considerations or things to think about when you're using these approaches, if you're in a very, very highly urbanized area, it's a little bit more difficult to implement some of these methods. Sometimes they might conflict with local standards, for example, street width or curb requirements. I think that's getting better, but that's sometimes can be an issue. And you have to really think about it early in the process. You can't really wait till the very end to try to think about how to do it. Impervious cover disconnection and filter strips. This is another one of these kind of landscape scale practices. Some of the benefits, of course, it reduces pollutant loads. It does provide some groundwater recharges as well. And also it's another, this aspect of disconnecting impervious cover, leaving these areas is another way to help provide this right of way for flood events. And it can be integrated into existing site design. Sometimes even in an existing development, methods to try to disconnect impervious cover can be kind of a simple way to use the landscape. Some things to be really careful about, though. You need to be careful about how water flows over the surface so you don't end up just short circuiting these practices. And of course, it's not as effective or not as feasible on sites that have very little space. For example, it's very concentrated development, or if you have very steep slopes. So I'm sure you've all seen bioretention and rain gardens coming online. These are really heavy hitters because they're so versatile. They have good pollutant reduction. Depending on their design to various degrees, they can incorporate storage to help with storm peak reduction. They can be either designed like a filter where water flows through and there's an under drain where they're just kind of filtering water, or if you don't need to do that, if you have good enough soils, you can actually use it to recharge the groundwater. So that's really getting to that, where our regulations are changing, we need to get more groundwater recharge. These could be a great practice for that. And they can be nicely integrated into lots of different kinds of settings. In an urban setting, they can, be almost like a curbside kind of practice. They can also be just as at home in a residential landscape. Some of the key considerations, you will likely need to incorporate some kind of under drain if you don't have very good soils. So that could mean high groundwater table. It could mean your soil is just too tight. They don't want to percolate. And like any practice, they need ongoing maintenance to maintain their performance and their vegetation. One thing that makes these like a little bit special about their ongoing maintenance is sometimes in the original design, it has, very, very nice vegetation, so that you'll need to have a landscaping element to the maintenance. Permeable pavement, also pretty versatile type of practice. And Scott Turner, our next speaker, is going to talk about a project that uses it. Again, good at pollutant reduction. It's mainly achieving pollutant reduction though by its infiltration. It can, provide recharge into the groundwater. It really seems to be a quite effective tool at reducing flooding too, just because, compared to many practices, it covers a relatively large surface area. So you can really, it acts like, permeable surface. And, another great thing about it is it really does not reduce any usable space, that the stormwater practice is the practice surface. Some considerations, the biggest kind of risk or potential issue with permeable pavement is that it can clog. So for some really, really high traffic areas, it might not be the best application. Some designs will just use permeable pavement in the parking areas, but not the areas where people are actually driving, or they'll use it in a part of the parking lot. There is ongoing maintenance, just using vacuuming to keep the surface permeable. And, like any of these practices that are using infiltration, you do need to consider the condition or the type of the underlying soils. Green roofs. This is a maybe less used practice, except for primarily in pretty highly urbanized areas. Some of the benefits of green roofs. They do have pollutant reduction. I put an asterisk with this because there's some studies that are showing that that they may leach phosphorus, at least when they're first implemented, because of the phosphorus in the media used to establish the vegetation. They do appear that they can depend, especially depending on their design, provide some reduction of peak discharges and some evapotranspiration. So they're, getting at part of that water cycle. They're great for heat island or reducing the amount of air conditioning that's required. And just like the permeable pavement, it's not using space you would otherwise be using. The one potential competing use can sometimes be solar panels, interestingly. There's no, some of the special concerns on older buildings, you need to analyze if it could bear the weight of both the green roof and snow, and it's relatively expensive. The last practice I just wanted to highlight is rainwater harvesting. We're going to have an example case study using rainwater harvesting. So a great thing about it is that it's achieving two goals. You're both conserving water, so you're kind of at this largest watershed scale, helping with that issue. It reduces the volume of runoff because you're capturing water and taking it out of the water cycle, and it can reduce the volume of floods depending on how much storage you have, and also minimal space consumption. Some considerations, the biggest issue with rainwater harvesting is finding a use for the water. It seems great to collect it, but if you have nowhere to put it, it's not really very helpful. So you need to go through analysis to see, do I have a way to use it? The best thing is if you have an inside use, because then you could use water all year round. So the biggest examples would be for plumbing. I'm sorry, for toilet flushing or things like that. Kind of a something that doesn't need to have drinking water standards. There are special design considerations about this. You need to have a separate plumbing system that uses that water. So it's not a small thing to think about it. For outside use, that's relatively easy, except that you have to analyze and see, well, over the year, is it enough? Do I have enough demand for the water I'm using? Other things that can be used for is, say, like washing cars, things like that. Those are relatively easy. Okay. Went through, I think we're doing pretty good on time. I had a really, really quick exercise, and I wanted people to see if they could use the chat to help with it. Okay. Oops.
Happy to monitor the chat box.
Okay.
when you
Oh,
go
that's
there.
okay. Great. Oh, thanks. Because I was having a little trouble with trying to see it all at the same time. Thank you. Okay. So I was going to do something called chat waterfall. So I'm going to say, this is very similar to what Lee was doing earlier. I'm going to just present a really quick scenario. And when I say go, people could just put their responses in the chat. And we can kind of see what we got. Okay. So our first scenario is a residential subdivision. It's going to be a new development, a 50-acre site. We're able to have 100 homes. So, the zoning is for about half acre. And the site has a mix of forest and grasslands, but it's a new area. Or it's a green site development, I guess. So I guess my first question is, what are some of the first things you want to ask yourself before you begin the project, or if you're a developer, even before you buy the land?
Right, to read some of the
Great.
responses that are coming in.
Great.
How much impervious surface will we create? What are the natural features of the site? And what is important to preserve? Soils. Few people are identifying soils. What's the soil like? Are there wetlands? What's the infiltration rate of the soils? Wetlands nearby. Again, any special features to protect, subsurface conditions and potential stormwater discharge points, and then local regulations and permits.
Great. Yeah, I think people touched on the main things. I'm really, yeah, the soils in particular. I feel like it's just kind of keep hearing this. It's when people go to a site, kind of have an idea of what you might want to be able to do or what you think you can be able to do, that the soils are going to really drive it. But also these, natural features, kind of outlining natural features before you even approach it. There's the question of what are the local regulations is really a really important first step, because on both sides. First of all, I think Phil was talking about, well, some local regulations, it's a different size that even trips the permit, but they might have different stormwater requirements or different natural resources requirements. But they also, there's this question of, do they allow cluster development? Somebody asked, do current regulations allow for clustering? If not, then it's really, it's really very difficult. Another question I would ask is it served by sewer or is it septic? If it's septic, that really changes what your options are for what you're able to do on the site. But yeah, great first thoughts. Okay. Scenario 2 is just a
Deb?
new. Yep.
We're running a little bit behind on time,
Oh,
so
okay.
if we could move on to the next speaker, but we can come back to these
Oh, sure.
other scenarios at the end if we have some time.
Sure. That sounds great. Thank you.
So thank you, Deb. Again, if you have any questions about the content that Deb covered, feel free to put your questions in the chat box and we can get to those at the end. But right now, I'm going to introduce our next speaker. So our next speaker is Scott. It looks like he's sharing a screen, so I'll just go ahead and give a brief bio. So Scott is the director of planning and a principal at Environmental Partners with over 30 years of experience in civil engineering, planning, and stormwater management. He specializes in site development, permitting, green infrastructure design, and resilience. And his diverse project experience includes managing and directing complex land development, green infrastructure, and resilience projects. So Scott is going to talk to us today about consideration of risk during design and 2 case studies, and that will be followed by a brief Q&A.
Okay, thanks, Leah. I appreciate the introduction. Like Leah said, I'm the director of planning and principal at Environmental Partners. My background is a little bit unusual in that I'm a registered professional engineer. I'm also a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners and a lead accredited professional in neighborhood development. And like Leah said, I specialize in stormwater, land development, and planning. Although most of my work has been over my career, which is over 30 years, hard to believe, has been in land development. Recently, I've been doing a little bit more municipal work and some MS4 work as well. And so one of the things that they asked me to talk about first, before I get into a couple of case studies, is really considerations and risks and things that developers typically look at in terms of developing projects and finding sites. I'm not a developer. I've just been hanging around with them for quite some time. And things that they're looking for are really location. A lot of that depends on the use. I've done a lot of hotel work, and I know hotels have very specific land uses that they like to locate next to. Access and visibility. Are they close to highways? If they need to have a lot of traffic, are they generating the surrounding transportation network generating enough volume for them to have a successful project? Floodplain is obviously very important. You don't want to build in an area that is prone to flooding. And nowadays there's more focus on what future floodplain may look like, what things may look like in the future due to climate change considerations. Soils, very important. That the exercise that Deb led, a lot of folks talked about soils, and that's super important, especially as it pertains to low impact development. Ledge is important because it drives up your development costs. Hazardous materials, obviously, another cost consideration in development costs. Thinking about risks and thinking about one project in particular that I'm going to describe in a few minutes, flooding is a major issue, is a major concern, both for the building, but also the utilities and the critical systems that service the building, access. And then a huge risk for developers is also regulatory and permitting risk. And how are their projects going to be received? What is the permitting timeline? Are you going to be stuck in front of local boards or in state permits for a long time? And if you're doing something with green infrastructure, a lot of regulations right now still, despite the requirements of the MS4 permit, have not incorporated green infrastructure requirements. So if you want to use green infrastructure, but the regulations call for traditional gray infrastructure, then you have to ask for waivers or variances. For subdivisions, most subdivision rules and regulations in Massachusetts are quite old. They always go back to pipe sizing, catch basins, drain manholes, head walls, but they don't really consider green infrastructure practices. So that's something that the MS4 permit that Phil talked about earlier is looking to change. But municipalities have been slow to adopt, although they are certainly coming around. So I'm going to talk about two projects where we had interesting applications of green infrastructure. And this first project is a project I did prior to coming to EP. It is located on the South Shore, just off of Route 3. It is located at the Route 3 228 interchange. And it used to be exit 14, but since we renumbered since the DOT renumbered all the exits, I'm not really sure exactly what exit it is now, but it straddles the Hingham and the Rockland line. The site was limited by Route 3 to the north. There were surrounding wetlands to the west and to the south. There were existing development to the east and to the southeast, but the site really had excellent soils for stormwater management and green infrastructure, including really sandy soils and deep groundwater. And we had an unusual site program in that it required lots of parking for cars. This is a automotive dealership, so it required an extreme amount of parking spaces, mostly as inventory for cars. Somebody described it once as, you got to think of the cars at an automotive site as, similar to cans of vegetables at a grocery store. You stack them up, they sit there, and then when somebody buys one, you pull them out. And when I get to the site plan, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. And then another interesting item for this was that visibility from Route 3 was super important. So for those of you traveling along Route 3, there is a significant tree canopy, I guess, along the right of way. And Mass DOT they have regulations that say you cannot just clear in the right of way for visibility. So that was something we had to overcome, and we used an interesting green infrastructure solution to accomplish that. So this is a site. This is a site as built. And as I described before, it is a auto dealership for BMW and Mini. It's a 50,000 square foot building surrounded by some parking, but also a lot of storage for vehicles. We needed 468 spaces. So for those of you who design sites, you realize that is a high amount of parking spaces for a building of this size. And even though part of the site was in the town of Rockland, one of Rockland's requirements is significant infiltration and no increase of volume off site, which is really hard to do when you have ledgy soils. So again, this really pushed the envelope in terms of being adjacent to the Route 3 right of way, the Route 3 off ramp, and on the left-hand side of this slide is all wetlands. And to the bottom, you can see the South Shore Chamber of Commerce building. So what we did, because we were so limited, is we decided to use porous pavement in all of the parking storage areas or the inventory storage areas. So if you look at this site, you can see the darker pavement is for car storage. So you can see it on the bottom right-hand side of the slide, and then the upper left-hand slide. It was a perfect application for porous pavement for a couple of reasons. One, not a ton of traffic. So one of the things about porous pavement is not as durable as normal pavement, or typical pavement, traditional pavement. So you don't want to have a high level of cars driving on it. And this is perfect because you don't have a high volume of cars driving on it every day. You bring the cars in, you park them, they sit there, and then when they're bought, they move out. Again, we had great soils, we had deep groundwater. We did run into a bit of a permitting snafu. We were on the Hingham and Rockland town line, so we had to go for permits in both Hingham and in Rockland. The lower, I guess, the right-hand side of the site is in Rockland. And when we were in the approvals process, our original plan had the strip of parking located in the lower left as all that inventory storage as pervious as well. But the town's review engineer, who was not very comfortable with porous pavement, was not thrilled. He was concerned about pollutants. This isn't a watershed to a town of Rockland's drinking water supply. And so the way we got this approved was we ended up taking the porous pavement out and building an infiltration system below. However, that was at significant cost. Probably added $100,000 to the project because we had to build additional retaining walls and heighten some of the ones that we had proposed. And we had to build one of those large Cultec systems underneath the parking lot. So it added significant cost. One of the things I always am asked about green infrastructure is, does it cost more or does it cost less? And the answer is really, it's different. I mean, for this project, if we hadn't used the porous pavement, we never would have gotten the project approved. In fact, we probably never would have been able to build the project simply because we needed so much land area, and the site was conducive to it. With regards to the visibility from Route 3, as you can see along the upper, right along the highway, that used to be a significant tree, stand of trees. And so one of the things that we did in working with Mass DOT was we decided to build a large bioretention basin in the Route 3 right-of-way that would collect water from Route 3, treat it, and infiltrate it in the ground. So it was a win-win for everybody. We got better water quality because we're collecting and treating and infiltrating water that otherwise was not going to be treated and infiltrated. And in order to build that, we had to knock down a few trees and provide more visibility for the auto dealership. So this is an example of how using green infrastructure enabled a project to be built. And again, the benefits and the considerations are really, we got great soils, got to use great amounts of porous pavement. Oddly enough, we built this right before the winter. We had, probably 100 inches of snow, 100 plus. And so I was kind of nervous about the durability of the porous pavement and all the plowing that was going on. But the porous works great, but it's because the owner maintains it. And as far as I am aware, we have not had to replace it. There have been no issues with it. Overall, it improves stormwater performance. And again, the review process, especially in Rockland, with their peer review consultant, was a little bit tricky. The next project I'm going to talk about is a project that I'm working on with Hawesbrook Real Estate and FM Global. This is a project that we are currently seeking permits for. We have our local approvals, but we do not have our state permits as of yet. Primarily NEPA, as well as some MWRA and Mass DOT involvement. But this is a really interesting project because FM Global has a really, because of the nature of their business, their insurers, they have a real strong resilience and sustainability culture. it's great to work with somebody like that because where some developers will want to perhaps not going above and beyond what the regulations say, FM Global has their own regulations that go above and beyond, especially when it comes to sustainability, resilience, and protecting their properties. So this building was, and this site development is designed over and above typical stormwater management guidelines and standards. And so this is the site. This was taken in the winter, obviously. The address is 1125 and 1175 Boston Providence Turnpike. There is, as you can see, a significant amount of pavement. You're looking up Route 1 to the north. The Neponset River is located behind the hotel, which is the brick building in the upper right-hand corner. And all the stormwater from the site drains from the south towards the Neponset River. So, you know, looking at it, this is an older site that was mostly developed prior to the stormwater management standards that Phil referenced. And so this project is all about sustainability, resilience, and improving stormwater management performance. And so this is the, again, this is the existing condition. You can see significant amounts of parking. We've got a medical office building here that's roughly 160,000 square feet. We have a hotel that's located here with 233 rooms and a significant conference center. Office building at 1151 that is about 140,000 square feet. And then we have a lot of their labs and learning centers for FM Global in the back here. So again, everything on the site flows towards the Neponset River. We had our wetlands resources delineated. We've got BVW, we have floodplain, we have riverfront area. We're not in any areas of critical environmental concern, no vernal pools, no outstanding waters, outstanding resource waters, but we are adjacent to the Neponset River watershed, which is Neponset River, which is a valuable resource. And so this is our proposed site plan. And this is a significant improvement over what was what's there now. Knocking down the 140,000 square foot building and building a 300,000 square foot office and lab facility, replacing some of the surface parking, and knowing that we have a greater demand for parking because of the larger building, we're building a 4-story garage. What that enables us to do is to really build this large green space around the building that helps to connect the campus, but also results in a reduction in impervious surface of an acre. And so for most projects that I do that are redevelopments, you're usually not seeing that kind of reduction, but the reduction in impervious surface on its own helps you meet the stormwater management standards because you automatically have a decrease in peak flows and you have less volume of runoff off of the site. But as I mentioned, FM Global has have standards that exceed what is typically what you typically find in the stormwater management standards, and they're all about doing the right thing. So what we proposed here, this is a highlight of the stormwater management system. We have a really significant bioretention basin here that is going to take stormwater from the building entrances as well as from the building, collect it, treat it, and infiltrate it into the ground. We're working really hard with landscape architects from Payette to design this area so that it doesn't really look like an infiltration facility or a bioretention basin. It looks more like plantings. And so it adds green space along Route 1, which is consistent with the town of Norwood's requirements for new buildings in this district. We also have a significant subsurface infiltration system in the back, bioretention basin in this new parking lot here. And then this parking lot behind the garage has actually been land banked. So we asked the town if we could hold off on building that because we don't feel we need the parking. It's there if we need it. but land banking, parking, and only building what you need, that in itself is a low impact development green infrastructure strategy, because it helps you to reduce impervious surface, and therefore you're improving your stormwater quality, you're improving your infiltration, all good things, especially when you're proximate to the Neponset River. The other important aspect of this, when you're talking about sustainability and resilience, I don't know if some of you remember or if you're familiar with Norwood, but probably 3 or 4 years ago, there was a really significant storm that actually flooded Norwood Hospital, causing it to be closed and reconstructed. During that time, but during that storm, we did get a little bit of flooding on the site, and it wasn't from the Neponset River, it was from Route 1. And so because of that event, FM Global, super cautious and super concerned about flooding. We've actually raised the building quite a bit. So whereas the old building was at elevation 151, and the 100-year floodplain, the current 100-year floodplain for the Neponset River is at 148, the first floor of this building will be at 161. So they are proactively raising the building to protect the building from any kind of flooding events that may happen, both from the Neponset River and from Route 1. But that's just the way they do things. And again, it's a great project. So this is what the project's going to look like from Route 1. This is a rendering that was prepared by Payette. Both they're doing architecture and landscape architecture. And you can see in the front, this is that large green space that will be a bioretention basin, but also is being designed as landscape. And then this is a rendering of the site plan. You can see that there's extensive plantings in the front here, in and around the building, and all of the green space. So, we have a great project here. It's great to work with the town of Norwood and FM Global, Hogsbrook Real Estate. So it's a terrific project. We're aspiring for LEED Platinum. May not get there, may just only get to LEED Gold, but everything about this project is about sustainability and resilience. So just want to reiterate the project benefits. We're decreasing impervious surface, restoring the natural hydrologic cycle that Deb described. It's consistent and exceeds the local, state, MS4 regulations. We had favorable local permitting with the Conservation Commission and the Planning Board. They love the project. In fact, when I walked out of our first hearing, I said to the folks from Hobbs Brook, I wish every hearing was that simple and that easy. And they said, well, when you have great projects, the permitting goes much smoother. And they're right. Improves the aesthetic of the campus, stormwater and floodplain performance, reduces heat island impacts. And again, we're going to LEED Gold and Platinum. So with that, that's my presentation. I have probably a dozen other projects I could have talked to about, but these are two great examples of how green infrastructure helps private development.
Thank you, Scott. We have 2 more short talks to go through in the last 15 minutes of the training. So I'm gonna keep us rolling, and then we'll save questions for the end. If we don't get to questions, we can also have our speakers respond to your questions via email. But go ahead and keep using the chat box for questions if you have them. And I'm going to introduce our next speaker. So our next speaker is Dayton Marchese. He's a professional engineer and partner manager with Opti in Boston, where he helps municipalities and utilities leverage technology to improve stormwater management and support smart city initiatives. So Dayton's going to provide a brief overview of a case study about smart reuse of stormwater.
Hey, thanks, Leah. Appreciate it. And thanks everyone for tuning in and sticking around. I'm excited to share a very quick case study with you about smart reuse, smart stormwater controls, real-time controls, and then a quick case study from Massachusetts that Opti did. And Opti is the developer, implementer, and operator of smart stormwater systems. We do this across the country, including in Massachusetts, and for a number of applications, including reuse. So I'm gonna go ahead and jump right in. Let's see here. So before talking about what smart reuse is and what smart stormwater controls are, and showing the case study, I just want to share quickly why we're doing this, what the benefits are. And at a high level, we're doing this because developers can realize economic benefits. That's one of the first things we look at. And when I say economic benefits, I'm talking about CapEx savings, primarily from making stormwater infrastructure smaller. So if you make stormwater infrastructure, including reuse systems, smaller or achieve multiple benefits like detention and reuse with a single facility, it can reduce the capital expense, it can increase the land availability. And that's a big part of the driver of what we do when it comes to smart reuse on private property. These systems are also more resilient. So we've heard a lot about flood risk mitigation and water conservation. By implementing these types of systems, you get these benefits as well. So your reuse system, so an underground stormwater vault, for example, that's being used for rainwater harvesting, can also be used for detention and flood risk mitigation without having to make it larger or putting multiple systems on site. And then the last piece we look at is really trying to deliver peace of mind for these asset owners. So one of the benefits, or one of the things that comes along for a ride when you implement smart reuse or smart stormwater controls, is these facilities are being monitored all the time with real-time monitoring equipment. So that way they can be controlled and they can be smart. But that also means that landowners can see the status of their stormwater infrastructure from their homes or from their computers, and it helps them mitigate the risk of some catastrophic event or not meeting regulatory compliance. So those are the big drivers. And when I say smart reuse or real-time controls, I'm talking about a technology called continuous monitoring and adaptive control, or CMAC. And really what this technology is it's a way to leverage information specifically from the weather forecast to automate the control of stormwater infrastructure. And that piece of information, that weather forecast, is huge, because we as engineers would design our stormwater infrastructure differently if we were designing for just the storm tomorrow. So typically stormwater infrastructure is sized to, say, capture the 2-year storm, the 10-year storm, and the 100-year storm, which means almost by definition, it's not optimized for any of those individual events. Now, if you use the weather forecast by, say, spinning up a cloud software platform that reads that forecast and turns it into expected runoff, you can redesign your stormwater infrastructure like your smart reuse systems for every individual storm event, making them much more efficient, much more effective at capturing stormwater and holding it for reuse in this case. And the technology itself, in terms of equipment, is relatively simple. We just put a control panel on site that communicates with this cloud software platform. The cloud software platform reads the weather forecast, turns it into an expected runoff. And if there's not enough capacity in the reuse system, say an underground vault, which the system automatically knows by reading a water level sensor, there's a command that says open a valve or a gate or turn on a pump to create additional capacity to accept that incoming runoff. And this is happening in an automatic way every minute as new water level sensor readings come in, and every 15 minutes as a new weather forecast is published. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. But the exciting thing is it lets us automate the control of this reuse system. So again, picture an underground vault or a large cistern on a commercial property where the tank volume is whatever the tank volume is before a storm event. And then before a storm event, the software system recognizes that a storm's coming and automatically signals down to your reuse system to say, open a valve or a gate or turn on a pump and discharge some of that water to, say, primary filtration, say a filtration unit, or to an infiltration basin. All of this is happening before a storm event. And I think it was Deb who brought up that demand is one of the biggest drivers of whether your reuse system is going to deliver benefit or not. Can you reuse the water? Can you actually use it? What smart reuse is doing is implementing another demand use. So instead of demand being to toilet flushing or to irrigation, demand is now we need to send this water away to create additional capacity for the next storm event. Then during storms, these systems capture that storm event again with the goal of filling right back up to the top at the end of the storm event so that it's full and that water is held and used for on-site use. And this is a real paradigm shift away from that traditional design of stormwater infrastructure, which is not designing for individual storm events, but designing for a whole climatic area or your locality or Massachusetts in this case. I mentioned it's all automatically controlled by software. So here you have a picture of a dashboard that users can log onto and view what's happening with their infrastructure. We have a bunch of these systems around the New York area, the Midwest, the Southeast for different reasons, for smart reuse, for water quality improvement, for flood mitigation. The equipment is all third-party off-the-shelf equipment that developers can purchase and install, relatively straightforward. Controllers, cellular telemetry, water level sensors, and an actuated valve. Those are really the three key components of a smart reuse system on site, in addition to the software system that runs it. And then now for a quick case study. So I'm going to talk about a case study that's under construction right now. They're wrapping up very shortly. This is in Watertown, Mass. The owner is Boston Development Group. The civil engineer is VHB. So they were the ones that had the foresight to design this system. And really the question was asked, is there a way to design a stormwater system here that can provide reuse, but can also help them meet their site requirements for detention and on-site capture and infiltration? Because this building, which you can see a rendering here, it discharges right to the Charles River. So it's right there on the embankment, and they need to meet a couple of critical regulatory requirements. Specifically, if I'm looking at the goals, so one of the big requirements was on-site management of the 100-year storm. So making sure to capture that, and then also phosphorus reduction. And then the goal was rainwater harvesting. And looking at the site, VHB was considering this. We were working with them to try and figure out what alternatives they should move forward with. And we came up with three alternatives. One is no rainwater harvesting at all. So you could design this site and you could put the required detention volume and you can meet your 100-year storm, and you can reduce runoff and infiltrate phosphorus with a single set of stormwater storage facilities, so infiltration basins and detention, but get no rainwater harvesting potentially. So take a big underground cistern and use it for detention only. A second option was to put two on-site storage facilities, one for rainwater harvesting and one for detention. And this is very typical. So if we look at private developers and they're doing rainwater harvesting, they also have to do detention. A lot of times it's two storage facilities, or sometimes one extra large storage facility that's maybe partitioned, with the bottom half being quote dead storage for rainwater harvesting and the top half being detention. Again, fairly typical. The downside is then you have to buy and install and maintain two facilities or one large facility. And that can mean loss of developable land and of course increase capital expense. And then the third option, we looked and said, well, what if you did one on-site cistern and use smart reuse to, during storm events or before storm events, draw it down and have that facility act like detention. And then during dry weather, hold water back as long as you want and use the storage for reuse. And we looked at back of the envelope costs and alternatives analysis for those three options. And it turns out that the smart reuse option was the least expensive over the life of the project. So about $800,000 in savings over the life of the project over what their other alternative would have been, which was those two facilities, one for reuse and one for detention. And then the other piece is they're able to, like I said, capture and treat that 100-year storm, infiltrated in their infiltration basins. They're able to be more resilient because they have an alternative water source, this rainwater harvesting, instead of relying on potable water, city potable water. And they're able to meet their regulatory goals and better manage these facilities. So, all around a win-win for both the environment and also for the developer, Boston Development Group, and we were happy to help out. That's it. Quick, easy. Have some time for the next speaker and happy to take questions afterwards.
Thank you so much, Dayton. All right, our final speaker is, we're going to bring back Phil from Beta Group, and he's going to be talking to us about considerations when hiring engineering consultants.
Sorry, I was muted. So thank you for staying with us. I hope you get a lot of information from this. So I wanted to wrap up. I've had the opportunity to review many projects throughout the eastern Massachusetts here, and I've designed many, but worked with many boards and developers and teams, development teams. And I just want to share my experience with what you may want to consider when you're choosing a consultant. So the biggest thing is just matching the project goals with the experience of the engineer and such. So a good engineer will ask you really specific questions about the development plan. Will do their own research, the site conditions, and what may be the restrictions or constraints, the challenges, and that can include everything, what we talked about in the chat there for site issues, and then also just knowing the regulatory processes. Not only the state, but particularly the local regulations, as we discussed earlier. It's very important that there's a opportunity to know how the boards react, what their priorities are, and general permitting process. But also finally, just that the engineer is really a consensus builder, incorporating the various boards and decision makers in town, as well as potential reviewers in a pre-application or pre-submission meeting, just to get a feel for their direction that they may give, and an opportunity for them to tell the developer what the potential conflicts may be with the residents or other departments, and then just being submitting complete submissions, because really the goal for the developer is to be in front of the public as minimally as possible. As I've noticed over the years, that the longer a project is in the public setting, and it has to be reviewed because of incomplete submissions or such, then there's a typically a loss of confidence in the team. So really just be doing your homework up front. They should give you a detailed proposal outlining their ideas in terms of what to do on your site. Many of these new BMPs and retrofits are relatively new, so the length of experience is not as important as the most recent projects that they've completed and or reviewed themselves. So anyway, that's a brief overview. I just wanted to cut it a little bit short here to end on time. So thanks.
Are there any questions for Phil or any of our other speakers? I know we're at the 2:30 mark, so if you have to leave, I want to say thank you for joining us. But I wanted to give everyone a chance to really quickly post any questions that they might have or raise their hand and ask a question to a speaker. All right, I have a question in the chat box from Frank. What is the difference between porous paving and Coltech? The water is percolating into the ground? Question mark.
So porous pavement is typically a surface type thing. A Caltech is typically a subsurface system that provides recharge. They both provide water recharge in different ways. So
Okay. Thank you. I also want to remind everyone, this is going to be the first time I'm trying this out, but I believe when I end the meeting, a feedback survey will pop up on your screen. So I'd appreciate you taking a couple minutes to fill that out. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful time. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And I will share the presentations and the speaker's contact information if you have any follow-up questions. All right. Bye.
Bye.